Thank you. Chair Hansen.
Standards and Assessment Committee, we have two actionable items. First one, 13.3 on the agenda. This was a review that we did of professional learning related to online learning. We had several different items we were looking into. The motion today is only in reference to charge one, we called it, which is to either further investigate professional learning or continue on the same path. Staff looked at what was available for online learning in UEN. They vetted the top used videos. After vetting, 7 videos were curated from the top 15, and right now the action that we're proposing for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve charge one of the professional learning and parent resources for online learning and post those resources to the USBE website.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves charge 1 of the professional learning and parent resources for online learning and post the resources to the USBE website. Discussion, seeing none, please vote. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
No.
That passes with Board Member Belknap opposed.
One other item, this is item number 13.5, elementary social studies standards. The committee moves that the board approve the release of the elementary social studies standards draft for 90 days of public comment.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves the release of the elementary social studies standards for 90 days of public comment. Discussion, Board Member Earl.
Would this be an amendment to the motion, right? Okay, I would like to make an amendment to the motion.
Go ahead.
Okay, my motion or my amendment is that the Social Studies Writing Committee continue work on the K through 6 social studies standards by addressing and implementing the 9 recommendations listed below. After revising the standards, bring a new draft for board consideration before proceeding forward with public comment. And you want me to read the 8 recommendations? I mean 9?
That is a really long amendment. Let me just pull it up and make sure I have got it on the screen.
Did somebody have that?
Do you have
put
that?
up?
Oh, yeah.
It's in the backup, I think.
It is in the back. Yeah.
Is it adding or taking away from the motion?
Well, that's a good question. It would be taking away, right? Because we're not going to put it out for public comment. Let me see the motion. Yes. Yeah. Do you want me to read through the recommendations?
A question, would the recommendations be part of the motion? Would we need to put that whole thing as one motion, or would the motion just consist of the language at the top?
In my view, it has to be that in order for the recommendations to be considered. Is that
Okay.
accurate?
Sybil, are you saying it should be all of it?
Just the 9 recommendations, not the whole thing.
Okay, go ahead with your amendment, please.
You want me to keep reading that?
Yes,
Okay.
if you wanted included in your amendment.
Yes, number 1, add specific and detailed standards with clear expectations for better learning and assessment. 2, include a thorough study of American history, civics, and character education as outlined in Utah Education Code at every grade level. 3, remove any assumptive language and replace with historical facts obtained from primary sources. 4, refocus standards on U.S. constitutional law over elevating international law and rights through globalism or community building. 5, articulate clear standards about diverse historical figures who exemplify the characteristics outlined in law and honesty, integrity, morality, civility, duty, honor, service, and obedience to law. 6, remove standards that focus students' time and education on seeking out, creating solutions, and addressing areas of injustice in society or action civics. 7, specifically addressed World War I and World War II in the standards. 8, evaluate the political narrative of asking K through 6 children to focus on human impact, human geography, and environmentalism within the standards. And 9, return exact dates, geography, locations, and people, including full names to the standards.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the Social Studies Writing Committee continue work on the K through 6 social studies standards by addressing and implementing the 9 recommendations as read after, or listed below, after revising the standards, bring a new draft for board consideration before proceeding forward with public comment. And I will read all of the recommendations when I read the motion at the end of discussion again. Board Member Straight.
Need some help, parliamentary, So, as stated, these are recommendations. The purpose of where we're at right now is to receive public comment and recommendations that anyone may have in regards to this. I would say at this point, I would be against changing the current language, but I also respect the recommendation. So if it's a recommendation, then I don't want to replace with a recommendation something that's been worked on by this committee. I would rather they receive these as a result of public comment. So I'm not sure where we go with that. What's appropriate?
You can amend the amendment. We can have one more on this motion.
Okay.
There's a motion, an amendment, and you can amend the amendment.
My amendment is that this be forwarded to the committee as a recommendation. Is that not right?
Or Chair Huntsman.
To meet the intent of the amendment, and the amendment either takes away or adds to the motion that came, but she can make a motion to postpone until this happens in a committee, because I don't believe this, I'm not showing how this adds to the motion that was made, because the way the motion was stated, this has to go out. It is going out. So is this going out, and that this is gonna,
Be added to it.
that the committee is gonna continue to work on the standards addressing these 9 things? So I'm not sure if she's trying to hold, I'm trying to understand the intent of this motion. Is this to not have the standards go out and do this work, or do this work, or no, have the standards go out and also give direction to have this stay in committee addressing these 9
Can you
issues? I'm trying to meet the
clarify?
intent.
Board Member Earl, can you clarify that intent?
The intent would be, instead of approving it for public comment as stated in the original motion, would be to, so this would be a substitute motion? Is that what? This could be a substitute motion for the original motion then? Or it could be that it's not approved and that this motion is considered. So it would be a substitute motion. Okay, so it wouldn't be amendment. Then I would propose the substitute motion.
Okay, we have a substitute motion on the floor that the Social Studies Writing Committee continue work on the K-6 social studies standards by addressing and implementing the 9 recommendations listed below. After revising the standards, bring a new draft for board consideration before proceeding forward with public comment. I have a second?
Yeah, so, but I don't think
Who's-
it's an appropriate motion.
The substitute motion now.
Is that right? You make an amendment, but you can't. Right. You have to say with the motion. So how can she add or take away from that?
Instead of approving, I would
So can we not do a substitute motion then?
She can't do it.
Which adds or takes away?
Yes.
Just a second.
So the motion is, the committee moves the board approve the release of the elementary social studies standards draft for 90 days of public comment. So that's the motion that's on the table.
So the change would be, where is it? Where am I looking?
We could, it's not up there.
Oh,
I don't-
sorry.
They could throw it up. It's on the.
So that the
agenda
board
memo.
not approve.
The motion is just to not postpone the motion, but postpone the action of putting it forward to the public. And that's what you're trying to do, right?
Right.
And you want the committee to work on these
To
things.
just
So are you
postpone.
just speaking against the motion? Because if that motion fails, then this goes back to committee, right?
Then you do this.
And, well, not
That
go
doesn't even sound
forward,
like the
so it
right
wouldn't
thing
go to
to.
public comment. It wouldn't adopt the other things. That would have to be another motion on the subject.
Motions, because I think a substitute motion might be appropriate in this case. I asked at NASB's parliamentary procedure about exactly when you could use a substitute motion, and they said a substitute motion was about a paragraph long. It's not appropriate as an amendment, but it replaces at least a paragraph of a previous motion.
I see our AAGs shaking their heads.
So
Nodding heads.
Nodding their
I should have said nodding. Can I call on the AAG to clarify?
Yes, you can.
AAG Brian Quisenberry, can you come to the microphone, please? Or Michelle? We're so sad we're going to lose you.
She leaves.
We should get AAG Buse for our last great expert advice.
It's ready.
And don't worry, Board Member Straight, I will come back to you also.
Okay, so I think Janet's correct. Here's what I found, a substitute
Okay,
motion.
so if we can turn our attention to AAG Quisenberry, and then we'll know how to move forward.
Let's see, Brian Questenberry, legal counsel, and here's what I'm finding. A substitute motion is a form of amendment applied when the desire is to amend a motion in several different non-consecutive places. It also is used when the text to be amended is longer than a paragraph. And so that's it. So it is one of three ways to amend a motion. So that's the question we need to ask is, the text to be amended longer than a paragraph.
Is there something that's about substantive changes?
Substantive changes. Yeah,
Okay, Chair Huntsman?
So the other way to do this is to meet the intent, I'm just trying to I think I understand the intent, is Member Earl could speak against the original motion and state these reasons why and she could say in the intent, with the intent of her speaking against it, are all these reasons, and if the motion fails, then she can bring this up as a motion to go back to the board. But she can definitely speak against the motion and have these in record.
So would then, if she did that, and then the motion fails that the standards committee made, then would she have the opportunity to still go back and make this again
Yes.
as a motion?
Yes. And if it passes, then she doesn't, but at least gets it out in public. She has an opportunity to put it out in public record.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our AAG Quisenberry. I'm going to you for your final recommendation on how to move forward on this.
okay, so
Yes, we do.
are we talking about longer than a paragraph? I guess if we established whether the language it's going to be substituted is more than a paragraph? Right. And it's, okay, yeah, so then it's,
Because it's different.
and you said it has been seconded, the original?
Yes, Board Member Klein, I believe, did you second? Yeah. The amendment was seconded, and the motion came out of committee, so it doesn't need a second.
The original one, yeah. So although it's one sentence, but the entire thing is intended to be substituted, it sounds like to me. So I would think. The whole thing.
I think a substitute removes.
Chair Huntsman,
So I think it's,
Yes.
it is doable.
your light is on.
You're chairing, so I don't want to tell you how to chair.
Just go ahead and give your advice.
Okay. Okay, you have to, whatever you restate before it goes. So if you want to leave it the way it is, the way that it is amended,
I have restated this as an amendment.
what's that? You haven't stated it yet. That's what I'm saying. Yet.
Yes.
Because you have to,
It's a
you
substitution.
decide, and you can use help to say, is this a valid amendment to the original motion? And so,
So I restated her amendment, and then I went on to an amendment to the amendment. So maybe
Which-
we need to just stay.
but you didn't, I don't think you got a second, and you didn't.
Board Member Klein.
Did you restate his amendment?
He didn't need one because it came out of committee. I have not had a second on the amendment to the amendment,
Okay.
nor have I
So that's
restated
not
it.
on the table. It's not on the table because you haven't said it. So you don't have, you can totally ignore it. But you don't want to ignore it because you want to move her intent forward. This is all about her intent. So how do you get to the space of what she's wanting to do? And what-
Okay.
Motion's on the table and it's a valid motion, then it belongs to the body.
Which you can substitute, because I think it's the entire thing. So I think a substitute would be proper.
Okay. So we have a substitute motion on the floor. They're all saying that you can.
Okay, well, but not that.
Yes, this would substitute the original motion. It would substitute the whole thing. It would substitute the whole thing. That's what they're saying is okay. Even the original motion maker, I think now is saying that that is right. Is that right, Chair Hansen? Are you saying that you're researching this and it looks like we can make a set? Okay, we have a substitute motion on the floor, which I have already read a couple of times, and then I called on Board Member Straight. He can now amend the substitute motion. Correct? Okay, I can, and an amendment to the amendment, right? Or can you only amend a substitute motion one time?
No, you can make an amendment to the amendment.
Okay, Board Member Straight.
Okay, so we are in the early stages of a process. We're at the stage where we're releasing it for public comment. We should keep that in mind in the proper order of things. I think this amendment is attempting to bypass that system and to send on to public comment a document that is not what was sent by our committee. Now, they're going to get it back, right, after public comment? So my motion, I don't know if I can state it correctly, is that the substitute motion be included in public comment and sent to the writing committee.
The public.
I'm sorry, to the public for public comment. Okay,
To the public, or be submitted as public comment?
Yeah, that would be included in the.
it'll be included in public comment.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor that this substitute motion be submitted with public comment.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Do we have a second?
That's not the motion. That's not.
Okay.
Just include this in public comment, then what happens to? This would be, and there's nothing that would prevent board member Earl from submitting.
Oh,
Okay. Do you want to continue in your path? Do you have? Okay, Board Member Straight, do you want to continue or do you want to withdraw?
I will withdraw.
Okay. There is an amendment.
That's an excellent point.
Okay.
So I appreciate that.
There is an amendment on the floor. Is there, Board Member Cannon?
I know you guys were talking about substitute amendments, and I've looked up some things on substitute amendment. It says in Robert's Rules of Order, a substitute amendment is a form of the motion to amend. It could be debated, modified, and voted on like other amendments. It can substitute a sentence, a paragraph, a section, or it can be the entire motion or resolution that is substituted.
So he could amend the substitute motion, and he could amend it that Deputy Superintendent, Assistant Attorney General Buse?
Come on, but you have to vote to accept the substitution before you amend the substitute motion. You haven't accepted it yet. So you need to vote to accept the substitute motion before you start amending it.
Okay, so there is a substitute motion on the floor that we are currently discussing that has to pass before we can amend it and accept amendments. Thank you. Board Member Hymas. Oh, sorry, I think I've missed. Chair Hansen, is your light on because you're presenting, or would you like to speak? Okay, Chair Hansen.
We had this debate in our meeting as well, in our committee meeting. Board Member Earl has prepared more detail than what we had, but basically, to me, I look at some of these recommendations, and I'm not disagreeing with many of them. I think, though, that we have a process. We selected a writing committee who are, I understand, and I think that we can have some comment on that. These are people who are selected as being good people in this field, right? And it included people who've had a lot of experience with social studies and how that should be taught with the standards. They've dealt with those before. We gave them a charge to come up with a draft standard, using our old standards and adapting those as they saw fit. That comes to us, and then I think right here we're deciding whether board members now can send it back to the writing committee and say, no, we don't like that, so give us a new version of it, or whether it goes out to the public and then everyone gets a chance to comment, and then it goes back to the writing committee, and the board still has a chance at the end to adopt, to amend, to do whatever we want to the standards. So for me, this is a process argument, and I think that if we want to do this differently, and if this would be the acceptable way to do it, for us to take a crack at it now and send it back to the writing committee, we should adapt our process so that we give the writing committee more explicit instructions before they start. We don't have that process in place right now, though, so I think this disrespects the writing committee and our process if we were to send this back without getting all the comment. Then the writing committee can look at all the comment, they can send us something again, and then the board still has to adopt the standards. So we get last crack at all of this to make whatever changes. But the writing committee has come up with a comprehensive document that is tiered, that is tied in so that things are being taught at different levels, at different grades. And to just throw this back means they're going to start from square one, go through this and do it again for us. Then it's going to go out for public comment. Then it's going to come back to us, and we'll have more revisions that they need to make. I just don't see this as being an efficient process or a good one that honors the writing committee's work that's come to us so far.
Thank you. Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, I appreciate Member Hanson's comments. I'd like to speak in favor of Member Earl's motion here. Simply, in my opinion, when we have something to look at, that's what we are commenting on. So if we are to send this on to the public without these 9 or even some of these, then they're only going to comment on what they're viewing, not necessarily. So they're kind of missing out on an opportunity here, which I've read through these. I hope all of us have, and I find all of them valid. Some more valid than the others, but all of them valid and worth our time to think about. So, yes, it is a process, and it is a difficult process. But I do think that it's important that we put to the public and give them an opportunity to see what is actually, or what we're thinking, before we just say, okay, we're going to take your comment and then we're going to bring it back to the board, and maybe we put this in there and the public says, well, that wasn't on the table before. So for me, I speak for the motion.
Thank you. Board Member Moss.
I echo that. I guess I think Chair Hansen laid out a very good question there, the appropriate back and forth. My concern would be is if, and I share a sense that these provide some very good thoughts, that it would be, I don't think it would necessarily nullify the committee, but we as a board are, one of our main jobs is standards, right? I mean, there are a few things that are really within the board's exclusive domain, and standards are one of them. So I think it's appropriate for us to weigh in. The question is whether this is before or after or during public comment. My concern is if it's after, then we come back and we change it, we'd almost have to put it back out for public comment. If we do it now, we can take a look at it, consider it. The committee may or may not adopt 9 or 5 of these, but that would give us then a kind of a product that says, here's what the committee did, here's the board input, and now we could take it out for public comment. And perhaps the idea is that should be standardized somewhere, but I'm not aware of anything that would prevent us doing it here. And that would give a full picture for public comment after consideration.
Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I'm speaking to the motion. I didn't get to speak earlier, and that's okay. As we were trying to sort it out, the process does not allow us to engage until this point. Whether it's good or bad, I think there's some disadvantages to that, because we actually don't engage in that at all. It's like I said in committee, I mean, we never saw anything until 3 days, 4 days before it came to Standards and Assessment Committee, which wasn't enough time to thoroughly digest and go through it, but it was enough time to do a brief read over it. We do have the ability and the authority, I believe, to make sure these are the best standards before they go out for public comment, not on the backside. And I agree that if we have to do major revisions and such, then it would almost need that idea of going back out for public comment, because then they're at the point where we want to receive that public comment. The idea of last crack, we've done last crack quite a bit of times, where it's after everything else, then we have a say in it. And I understand, I respect the people that have written this. This is not a disparagement. This is looking at, and I did a lot of looking and saying the comparison and where do we want to be and where does Utah want to be. A lot of the arguments that are going on currently in our society are around this topic. We should have the best, and they should be clear. There shouldn't be any ambiguity. The way they are right now, they're very ambiguous. It's not like we can make a couple of amendments or be here till 1 o'clock in the morning and we fixed it kind of thing. We're doing little word changes here. The structure, I believe, is not where we want it to be yet. And this gives clear direction as to where we can take it. It's not, it helps people move forward, I think, in a clear direction. Keep in mind, we really didn't have any say ever until now, or committee meeting. That was the first time we had any say in it. There were broad statements, the parent review committee made recommendations, but they didn't have to be adhered to. It was just, these are some recommendations. We may take some of those into consideration. And then the committee has been working. We never saw the workings of them until, like I said, last month. And so, to me, these are not adequate. And they need to be adequate before they go out for public review. And that's why I'm asking for this to take place the way it is. So.
Thank you. Board Member Norton?
I'm concerned about the process as well. I think that, this is not the time for us to deviate from our process. I think if we need to change our process, then we need to change our process. When I see words like that we're going to implement these 9 recommendations, Jenny, I agree. I think, this civics is so important, but I have a hard time when one person gets to then put this out to the public when, for me, I just saw these a day ago. And so I think that has totally circumvented the intent of the public input, the education input, the higher ed input, and so I'm not comfortable with that. I think that we need to go with our process, and I think that, to just throw this out there right now and say, okay, this is what you have to implement is not providing the process that was intended to keep this a document of the people.
Thank you. Board Member Klein?
So I am looking at this motion even being brought forward to begin with. It's on the agenda. It's part of the process that the board approve. We're voting on whether to approve it or not. So that tells me that is part of the process, and we have a role to play in that. And so I am all for this substitute and appreciate the work that Jenny's gone to. It's been a huge amount of work. She's done a ton of research, and our students deserve the very best when it comes to civic education. And I echo some of the other comments that have been made already. But if we want to get things back on track in our schools, it starts with a solid foundation in civics and history, and to adopt something that is so completely ambiguous and developmentally inappropriate in so many areas would be to our detriment. And if we put out recommendations to the public that are so lacking, especially considering the current climate of how people are feeling, it will only make the board look bad. And we don't want to make that worse. It's already a struggle right now, and we want to put our best foot forward so that we can earn the trust of the people back.
Thank you. Board Member Straight? Did I mess up?
Hold on.
Sorry.
I did that. Okay.
I know that many of the things listed here are things that I agree with. If I take on a different lens, though, as a teacher and someone who's supposed to be unbiased, if I divide the question between each one of the 9 items, then it becomes more complex for me. For example, number 4, refocus standards on U.S. constitutional law. Well, even the people who wrote in the Constitution disagreed about what it meant after they had written it. One of the most common phrases that we talk about in the preamble to the Constitution is promote the general welfare. We have been debating what that means ever since it was ratified on September 17th of 1787. Then that goes on, U.S. constitutional law, now it focuses it specifically on one item, over elevating international law and rights through globalism or community building. Now we're back to this idea of a political view that's supposed to be presented. Now, the discussion on opposing political views on the Constitution is an important thing to do. But as many of these are written, it's very nebulous as to what the definition even is. Articulate clear standards about diverse historical figures. Articulate clear standards. Definitionally, I have an incredibly difficult time defining what that even means. So for me, if you're asking me to accept all 9 as a bundle, I just can't do it, even though there are many things within here. Now, if this is a recommendation, let's consider these and let's have this debate. Then that's sort of a different thing. But I'm not certain where we're headed with these 9, because it doesn't just want to add something to or take something away. It wants to completely change the narrative. And so while I think each one of these is an important debatable item, and I could agree with many, many items in here, and to be honest with you, as I read the standards, because I printed them all out, I read through them, I even went to Utahns Against Common Core, and they were saying many of these same things, because I wanted to see what the different perspectives were, because they had comments on each one of these 9 items. In fact, they went through the whole standards. The document itself presented what was being taken away and what was being added. And I found what was being added to be much better from a teacher's standpoint. Instead of saying a very specific factor idea, it gave a broad view to where you could build your curriculum around it. Anyway, I'm not fighting for or against the document as is. I just want to keep the process moving forward in a positive way. And I think we heard these out. Not all of them. Some of them are new, but we already heard this out. And we went through 2 committees. And how often did you question every little detail of what was going on? No, hey, we formed these committees. You guys study these issues. That gets me about 95% the way there. Then I look at them. Do I have any major problems? Most of the time, I'm just going to say, I support the work of the committees. Now, that's not blind. I'm not saying we should just blindly approve something or not approve something. I want to be open. I want this process to be open. It's a long process. And yeah, guess what? When we get to the end and we make our final vote, there'll still be people who are not satisfied with it. And then they'll make their final plea, and then they'll be frustrated after because they didn't get their way. Or someone will be frustrated. Anyway, I've said enough.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman.
I'm looking at process too, and then I'm also looking at these and being something limited. So I'm speaking against the amendment. I'm starting to look through this, and I remember through the standards too, and I'm like, if we're going to get in more and more into the weeds of what absolutely has to be in place, I want to know more about 9/11. I want the kids to know about that, and I can't recall anything in our standards about 9/11, but and that's something that the kids are experiencing right now, every anniversary of September 11th. However, but I do recall in the standards that our teachers, and I agree quite a bit with Member Straight here, is that it has those opportunities to do that, and there's margins within those to teach those things. But I'm also a fan of process, and we worked on process. There's been some evolution of these standards, and the evolution isn't complete. It's going to go out to the public. I'm anxious for those public comments. And a lot of those comments come from educators and parents and historians and et cetera. So I have a great deal of concern in holding up the process. I'd like to make a motion to end debate. That's motion to, I was going to go get through my hierarchy of motion, but I couldn't read it from across my, call to question. Thank you.
Do we have a second?
Did I get ahead of you?
We have a motion on the floor to call the question and a second. Do we discuss or do we just move in?
I just heard my name.
Just move into it? Okay, those in favor, please vote.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that motion passes with Board Member Moss and Board Member Earl opposed. Okay, we have a substitute motion on the floor that the Social Studies Writing Committee continue work on the K-6 Social Studies standards by addressing and implementing the 9 recommendations listed below. After revising the standards, bring a new draft for board consideration before proceeding forward with public comment. The recommendations are: 1, add specific and detailed standards with clear expectations for better learning and assessment. 2, include a thorough study of American history, civics, and character education as outlined in Utah Education Code at every grade level. 3, remove any assumptive language and replace with historical facts obtained from primary sources. 4, refocus standards on U.S. constitutional law over elevating international law and rights through globalism or community building. 5, articulate clear standards about diverse historical figures who exemplify the characteristics outlined in law, honesty, integrity, morality, civility, duty, honor, service, and obedience to law. 6, remove standards that focus students' time and education on seeking out, creating solutions, and addressing areas of injustice in society. Action civics. 7, specifically address World War I and World War II in the standards. 8, evaluate the political narrative of asking K-6 children to focus on human impact, human geography, and environmentalism within the standards. 9, return exact dates, geography, locations, and people, including full names, to the standards. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Okay. Could I have the noes raise their hand? Sorry, can we have the ayes raise their hand? That will be easier. Okay, Board Member Earl, Klein, Hutchings, Hymas, Moss, and Belknap. That motion does not pass. We have a motion on the floor. The motion is that the board approves the agreement. No. We have a motion on the floor that the board approves the release of the elementary social studies standards for 90 days of public comment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Will the noes please raise their hand? Okay, board members Earl, Hart, Klein, Hutchings, and Hymas. And we will take a 5-minute break before we move to 328.